The next stage in the game is Point Prometheus. Notice the double helix design on the entryway, which seems rather appropriate since this is where the Little Sisters and Big Daddies were created. Prometheus, of course, is the Greek god of art and science, as well as the champion of humanity, stealing fire from the gods, which symbolizes the intellect and technology, and giving it to mankind. There are a lot of interesting connections to be made with this stage of the game and the god Prometheus. Suffice it to say, this is where Jack must transform himself into a Big Daddy. By this point in the game, having just freed himself from the suggestive influences of Fontaine on the previous level, Jack is ready to take on a completely new role. The irony of this situation, of course, is that Jack is assuming the role of yet another automaton in the form of a Big Daddy. Because remember, Jack has just been freed of Fontaine's influence. But here he is again having to choose basically to enslave himself in a certain respect if he wants to progress. This is yet another clue among many as to the biggest statement that's being made in Bioshock. This isn't a statement about free will or choice, but it's something else entirely. It's also interesting to note that in the center of the courtyard of Point Prometheus, there's a globe suspended from the ceiling with the ecliptic, the zodiacal ecliptic, which is the path the sun takes through each of the 12 signs of the zodiac as seen from Earth. The relationship between the 12 Olympians of Greek mythology and the 12 signs of the zodiac has been shown in several different ways over the course of Western civilization. It's just an interesting thing to see here, and it's also a very powerful symbol of fate. And also I found this image in Point Prometheus during Jack's scavenger hunt to collect all the parts to become a Big Daddy. The unity of opposites here between the Little Sisters and Big Daddy, or masculine and feminine, is quite obvious. For the first time, Jack, working with Tenenbaum and becoming a Big Daddy himself, is about to personally experience this unity of opposites in a sense. And this unity between the Big Daddy and the Little Sister, or between masculine and feminine, is actually what makes it possible for Jack to reach Fontaine in the final level for the in the confrontation that's about to take place. After making their way through the proving grounds, Jack finds himself at the final confrontation with Fontaine. With Fontaine completely overdosed with Adam, we are witnessing what the extremes of uncontrollable solipsism and the desire for boundless power looks like. We're starting to see Fontaine for what he really is, or what he really wants, or what he really imagines himself to be, or what he aspires to be. Fontaine, having manipulated his way into a position of power through the use of religious doctrine as well as with charity, right, which is a common tactic, is now showing us his truest form, or at least we're seeing what lies underneath the surface. This figure before us seems to be the physical manifestation of unsatisfied power and the unrestrained ego. And yet, with all this power, here is Fontaine, both tortured and restrained, his desires for power untethered to any virtues or guiding principles at all. He is in fact the most hopelessly enslaved character in the entire game. And so, only with the cooperation between the Big Daddy and Little Sisters, or the balancing of Adam and Eve, so to speak, that any semblance of balance and peaceful existence within the self can be found. Fontaine is the poster boy for what happens to those whom desire themselves to become godlike, free from the restrictions of the universe and laws of mortal men. In other words, it's not going to happen. The only problem with this, of course, is that nobody is free from the universal order, not even the gods of Greek antiquity. Which brings us to the greatest reveal or message of them all in Bioshock. And when I say greatest reveal, I mean at least on the surface. In order to see this great reveal in the first place, we have to understand that towards the end of the game, Jack somewhat succeeds in breaking the spell that Fontaine has over him for much of the story. However, Jack's success, if we can call it that, is something which Ryan, Cohen, and many others hint at in the game, but are never quite able to reach the figurative and quite literal transformation which is accomplished by Jack. This isn't to say that Jack has fully achieved success where all others have failed. However, he did get much closer than many others did. Now, this is where we really get into it. Contrary to popular belief, Bioshock at its core is not about Andrew Ryan's view on self-determination. Bioshock is not about choice, with the player deciding whether to harvest or rescue the little sisters in Rapture, because the story ends exactly the same either way. Not to mention that the rewards of harvesting versus rescuing little sisters actually ends up evening itself out by the end of the game. The choice in terms of reward is pretty much an illusion. Yet another clever fake out a la Mr. Levine. Ken Levine makes a big statement by leading the player down a certain path only to discover we've been duped and that Jack was created in a lab as an insurance policy. However, Levine makes an even bigger statement than this, hinting at what Bioshock is really about. Quote, "The game was really about lack of choice." Throughout Bioshock, from start to finish, every character and their subsequent beliefs are essentially dogmas created in order to compensate for the lack of any real choice. What Levine is saying, as far as I interpret it at least, is that what Bioshock is really about, if it's not about choice at all, is each and every character's belief in a choice. So it's not choice, but it's belief in choice. Which is to say, belief is the driving principle behind every choice. And belief determines one's thoughts and actions with little to no regard for what the facts are. A man chooses, a slave obeys. This statement from Andrew Ryan is ironically as much a dogmatic belief as the fervent religiosity and patriotism of this or that government or religion, which Ryan believes he is escaping by creating Rapture. There really is no refuge from the fateful conventions of belief in the first place, nor is there anywhere from which mankind may liberate themselves except only in non-belief, which may as just easily become a belief system if you're not careful. A man chooses, a slave obeys is as much a religious mantra for Ryan as the Lord's Prayer is for the Catholic Church. Only Ryan and many others seem to hold that this mantra somehow succeeds in distinguishing itself from other dogmas, only that it doesn't. It's just more of the same. The proof of the real underlying message behind Bioshock, if one refuses to believe the words coming from the lips of its creator, are hiding in plain sight with the tattoos. In this mantra, we have a man contrasted with a slave, right? A man chooses, a slave obeys. This infers he is therefore free. A man is free, and a slave merely does what they are told, right? A man chooses, and a slave does what they're told. A slave obeys, of course. However, Andrew Ryan, Fontaine, nor anyone else are able to succeed in being free of the oppressive doctrines of others, much less freeing themselves from their own self-imposed dogmas. Beliefs which drive Ryan and Fontaine on a path of self-destruction. There are no systems, methods, dogmas, or anything else which may separate man from the great chain known as belief. So this great chain is really the unwitting belief of Ryan. Ryan is holding to his beliefs without understanding that underneath the surface, it's belief that's driving everything. He thinks it's facts, but actually it's his belief that's running the whole show, and he's not aware of this. So Ryan leaves civilization behind, but fatefully brings with him the same unconscious penchant for dogma that paradoxically contributed to the creation of his own vision of the world in the first place. In the respect that we are all linked to the implicit order of the great chain of being, we will never be completely free of it. No matter how much we would like to escape this implicit order, there really is nowhere to go. There's nowhere to hide. Surely we can try tugging on it. The great chain can be pulled on now and again, but the great chain will invariably tug back. And that is completely beyond our control. In terms of the belief systems held by those remaining in the civilization that Ryan left behind, choosing the impossible is exactly what Andrew Ryan accomplished. In terms of his own belief systems, he really chose the impossible, which is evidenced by how things turned out for him and for Rapture. So a man may choose one or some other belief, while a slave merely obeys the dominant beliefs that they are told to believe. But at the end of the day, both the man and the slave, their actions both primarily depend upon beliefs, not facts. Beliefs which, when held onto very tightly, even in the face of death, amount to nothing more than a predetermined path which the true believer will swear is his destiny or his fate, depending upon how preferable the outcome happens to be. This all may sound rather dire to some, but the main takeaway from Bioshock comes more as a warning than some kind of prison sentence. It is not belief itself that is the problem, but rather a holding on to belief at the expense of everything else is where Ryan ran into trouble. Ryan possessed the confidence, the know-how, the belief in himself, and all the rest to accomplish what he accomplished, but he lacked the wisdom and understanding to realize that life isn't a series of problems to be solved. He hints at this at least once in the game, but he is far too late in gaining this realization for himself. Instead, inspecting our belief systems without attaching an image of who we think we are or who we think we should be in relation to our beliefs is the actual warning here. That's the message. And it's really an age-old wisdom teaching from the most venerated sages of antiquity.